Hello and welcome, dear listeners. Join Qatar Foundation's Senior Art Specialist Layla Ibrahim Bacha in conversation with the artist and architect Mohammad Hafez to learn more about his work and his upcoming exhibition, What is Home to You? Hosted by the gallery at VCUarts Qatar from January 19th to February 19th, 2022. Layla Ibrahim Bacha has more than 10 years of experience in curating and managing cultural events and projects. Currently, she is managing the art portfolio in Qatar Foundation, which includes major public artworks and museum collections. Layla Ibrahim Bacha is a member of several committees in Qatar, including the Public Art Committee, Museum Operational Committee, as well as the curatorial committee of an upcoming museum in Education City. Also, she was a part of working groups focusing on public art regulation in Qatar. Layla Ibrahim Bacha has given several lectures about public art curation and history, and her MA dissertation was about public art policies in Qatar. She received a bachelor's degree in Arts Plastiques from La Sorbonne University in Paris and an MA in Museum Studies from the University College of London. Leveraging his background in architecture, Syrian-American artist Mohammad Hafez creates photorealistic three-dimensional scenes that architecturally represent the urban fabric of the Middle East and serve as his backdrops for political and social expression. The work combines his passion for street art and activism and seeks to promote and sustain a global awareness about the ongoing Syrian conflict. The intent of Hafez's streetscapes is to expose the Middle East's conflicts to the world in a modest, artistic approach to appeal to a wider contemporary audience. In 2019, he was selected as one of the 40 under 40 artists in the Middle East by London's Apollo magazine. Thank you for listening.
Good evening, Mohammed.
Good evening.
Well, actually, it's a good morning for you in the USA. It's lovely speaking to you today. I'm looking forward for our conversation.
Thank you so much, Layla.
As a Syrian art professional, Mohammed, I often get asked this question: why have you never been into projects about the Syrian conflict? My answer is always because it hurts, and it still hurts today. Listening to you, Mohammed, and how you deal with your homesickness about this magical moment when you decided to deal with your nostalgia by recreating home made me realize that there is hope and that one day I will find my path of recreating home. So please take me and the audience to this moment again. During the Thanksgiving holidays, when everyone around you went back home while you couldn't, a moment that you reached after years of inner struggle with nostalgia, you finally find your path. So can you tell us more about this moment?
Sure, absolutely. I think what happened is I stumbled upon that method. It's completely was made on the moment and pressured by so much homesickness and sadness and, quite frankly, a little bit of depression as well. I think what happened is it wasn't I found the answer. I found the method to make me cope with the struggles that I was dealing with. So for me to take part of this very highly detailed miniature work of recreating home, the process in itself was very therapeutic. Of course, I was young and naive at the time, and I didn't know what therapeutic art was or cathartic art. But I knew that it made me feel connected and it made me feel at home. And every time I would try to remember the details, the architectural details of doors and walls, and I had to go look at photos and study them in ways that I haven't really noticed them before. Because, you're from Aleppo, I'm from Damascus. We walk through these old cities like they've been forever and they will be there forever. And so we take them for granted. When you recreate these things in miniature, you're having to restudy these details again and again and focus and zoom. The process itself really was very, very therapeutic. And I didn't know that I've reached something there, but I knew that it helped cope with my homesickness a lot. And I knew that I wanted to make more and more and more. And especially that I lost track of time when I was doing it. So, lonely people, homesick people. It's the time that kills. You're trying to pass time. This way of recreating, not only does it pass time, but also it immerses you in the process where you can easily lose track of 10, 11 hours straight, living in this creative, nostalgic bubble, if you may call it.
Nice. And I'm really, listening to you and about this Syrian architecture, it just brings to my memory those very specific architectural fabric that we are known of, like how they are made out of layers of thousands of years of architectural styles accumulated on top of each other, adding to it the overlapping daily scenarios, like the laundry lines on balconies, people conversing, and market activities. How easy was it for you to recreate them? And how long does it take to recreate them?
The thing to keep in mind about my work is I don't go after the final product when I'm making. I go after the process. So what that means is what is very giving to the artist is the process itself. And let me explain. So I first start by looking at a lot of photos of all Damascus, all Aleppo, all of these beautiful cities. And some of the photos I've taken, some of them are from the internet. And I study those photos. I look at people. I'm very interested in people and how they live in spaces and what they leave behind as traces. So you start looking at our streets and you see all of the signs and the layers and layers of paint. And you start wondering how many generations have passed through here and which generation does this layer of paint belongs to, right? So in that sense, the process itself, you had to kind of relive or recreate what was happening in real life. For example, it took 500-600 years to get 5 layers of paint, but I only have 5 hours in my studio or 5 months to recreate that. But that's exactly what I will do. I will paint, I will scrape it, I will say, okay, بعيش قصة الواحد مثل you're living a scenario like, okay, now a new family moved in and I'm listening to the Syrian music and I'm listening to the sounds and I put another layer, okay, and they had a naughty kid, so he damaged the window here, so I'll damage the window. And then the auntie so-and-so, she's doing laundry, so I'll put the laundry. And then Abu Ahmed moves next door and decides to paint a hot pink his balcony, when the other balcony decides to azziza, fill it with glass. And then, so for somebody, you got to remember, I didn't grow up in Syria. I grew up in a very manicured bubble in Saudi Arabia. And to come back to this hodgepodge of diversity living side by side with just like one residential apartment building in Syria is a carnival. كلهم يغني على ليلى. You got Abu Ahmed on the last floor decided to refinish his apartment. It's all filled with stone, but the whole building is stucco. But you have this one apartment is stone from the outside, as if he thinks or they think, people will see the stone only of his building. But it's like me manicuring or putting makeup on one eye. But it's so funny that you see this diversity and this way of living and the laundry lines and the satellite dishes, and their neighbor decides to put a hot red water tank, and the other neighbor puts 2 satellite dishes, and the other neighbor decides to enclose the balcony to marry the eldest son in it. نتزوج الكبير بيأززوا له البلكونة بيزوجوه فيها. So all of this life moments is really, it was astonishing to me as a second generation kid that grew up in the diaspora, and it stuck with me because I only lived in Damascus for about 4 full years. But I was so hungry for my culture and so hungry for my people that those 4 years were just enough to soak everything in. And it all came out in the diaspora when I started longing for these moments. And I think it made me, the process in itself was very therapeutic for me.
It's very amazing that how you created all these stories out of scrap metals and finding objects, like something you just found them in shops and in the street. So I imagine how difficult it was. However, after the Syrian war was erupted, you had to face the images of destruction on daily basis. So it is when your artwork started to represent those daily scenes of destruction. So you always managed to keep a positive tone in your artworks. So tell me more about these messages of hope and how you represent them in your work.
Without going too deep because that's a weak conversation in itself of how I grew as a human being as well through the war. And, asking myself, well, what can I do about it? Alhamdulillah, I was fortunate enough to be not living in that atrocity and to witness it firsthand, and to have my family, safe and sound. But with that comes the survivor's guilt, which is, what am I going to do about it? So I think there was a stage where I realized, as a professional architect living in the West, that no, my Syrian identity and artist has to come in the picture, and I need to humanize and talk about my other identity, which was completely obscured to most of my circles. They just knew me as the modern, clean-shaven architect at the time. So recreating the destruction was first understanding the time I was living in, understanding and representing accurately the era that I was living in as a Syrian American person, and where we come from. And I told people that, you shouldn't have an ounce of respect for me if all I did at that time is paint flowers. Nothing is wrong with painting flowers. It's just not my place in history as a Syrian Muslim American, named Muhammad, grown in Saudi Arabia and raised in the Middle East, living amongst a Western society during a very divided, xenophobic times and during one of the biggest humanitarian disasters in our history. So it wasn't my place. My place, first of all, as an artist, to understand that dark time I was living in. And hence comes the destruction pieces and the realism in destruction pieces. However, we are not people of despair in general. We're believers. We're people that believe there's justice that will prevail eventually. We believe in life. We believe in rebuilding. We're not people of destruction. We're people of life. So having the optimism part of it was crucial, not only for the future generations that were to come after, but to the current generations that are living under such circumstances. The way I've done it is, how do you speak to such a weathered society that is so old and so complex? You can't console somebody that buried most of their family members and lost all their belongings with earthly language. So I decided to use heavenly language. I started using verses of the Quran, verses of the Bible, common verses from, people that is very common, and I started graffitiing them on my miniatures. So there come the activism, the hints of hope. Sometimes Shaqa'iq al-Nu'man would grow up from destruction. Sometimes you'll read Inna ma'al usri yusra, Ad'uni astajib lakum, Ya Rab ma'alna ghairak, Ya Allah ma'alna ghairak, the common phrases that we started hearing from the streets as well. And I thought that would be a good message to my own people to just, persevere and to keep their hopes up, because indeed a lot of nations go through this up and down cycles, and we've seen a lot of nations rebuild from abyss, right? Rebuild from nothing. And that's what I wanted to communicate primarily to the Syrian people, but to the world in general.
I think that would bring me to my next question about when the Syrian refugee crisis was on a raise, and when the Syrian families started fleeing the country on floating boats, or what we call them death boats. You made it your mission to raise awareness about their situation, advocate and humanizing them. In your luggage series, you even used actual luggages from refugees that you have met. So tell us more about this. Why did it mean so much to you, and what you wanted to achieve through those representations?
It meant so much to me because on several levels, the refugee crisis had affected me directly. One, I had direct family members become refugees in Europe, and take one of those dead refugee death boats. And that shook me. The human being is programmed to always think that crises are over there, not here. Until, when you see your own family members, when your own blood and flesh in that situation, there's another level of crisis that hits in that, okay, we're also in it now, right? And my parents had to flee as well and live with me. So at that time, the dyslexia in my life was at its highest. I was going very fast pace in my architectural career, traveling all over the world, designing beautiful buildings and so on. And my personal life was going the other direction, same speed. And that black and white dyslexia that I was living really just had this huge force inside me, because part of what happened to me is that I am a good actor. I think any immigrant in the United States has to be a good actor to succeed in certain professional circles. So I blended in with my professional circles, and I started hearing things that I shouldn't hear, things that would come up talking about the refugees, talking about Muslims, talking about immigrants. And I saw a need to really, is that what you think about refugees? Well, let me show you what my own family is, or my own example is, to encourage people not to stereotype and not to paint people with one wide brush stroke. And then from that experience, my interest grew and grew and grew. And I've had known many refugee families here in the United States that have resettled from all over the world, from Sudan, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and I had known them for years, so I knew their stories. So I sat with them, they were comfortable with me, I was comfortable with them. They told me all of their stories. And then, alhamdulillah, I had the skill to kind of not only depict their part of their stories architecturally in a miniature form, but also my lived experience, almost the two decades that I've lived in the United States, gave me experience to choose from 6 hours conversation, 10 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. What would I tell a Western audience member that is completely against refugees? What soundbite would I pick from that conversation that would stir curiosity to wait, what? And so you multiply that by 10 suitcases, by 11 suitcases from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, all of these hot countries. And hopefully the visitor leaves that exhibit with the realization that there is a big common denominator among humans. And what brings us together is much larger than what divides us. and we're very similar at the end of the day, So art can be that universal global medium that demolishes walls between cultures and reaches out to the largest audience possible. And that was, I think, the richest experience. It was so rich for me that it led me to really be a full-time artist rather than, it was so rich that it got me to just shift my whole career and just focus on that moving forward.
So speaking about humans, in your work, when the facades of the buildings is taken away to reveal the life that was behind those walls, there are always traces of humans, remains of their last moments in their homes, but they are never present. There were never actual humans in your work. Am I right? So, so would you explain why you chose this indirect way of representing the humans in your work?
The beauty of miniature work is that it attracts a 7-year-old and a 75-year-old. It attracts so many people, attracts different people. Miniature works combined with the absolute genius of the human imagination is a fantastic duo. And you have to leave room for the human imagination to take place. So me as an artist, I just carve somehow the scene that imagination would go fly through. And I felt that traces of humans will raise so much curiosity that you want the viewer to dive into the scene so deeply that they start losing track of what they're looking at. And they go, what really happened here? Why did they leave the laundry here? And wait, this is a miniature. This is a sculpture, and they snap out of it, right? But that 2 seconds that the viewer lives into the scene of full realism is really something that I would not ever, ever, ever risk by putting a little plastic human being in there. No matter what you do, how realistic that thing is, that is a toy. That is a mannequin. That is a model, right? So it kills the human imagination. It veers on in my mind, closer to kitsch than fine art. So I stay away from that. Not that I haven't used, human beings in very, very selected pieces because they were very direct pieces that had to use those figures. But the majority, I want your imagination as a viewer to just roam around. The other thing about that is you have to remember that the human footprint, the human leaves so much traces on architecture and their built environment that you really don't need the human being to talk about it. A simple laundry line can tell you the history of the family, how many members and what they're living and what they're eating sometimes. So I think there's more creativity than just boiling it down to the easy answer of just sticking a human figure in there.
Very interesting. It seems you have also a certain attachment to audio or sound element in your work. It starts by playing Hamza Shakur and Sabah Fakhri to get inspired in your studio, and then by animating your final work with actual noises from Syrian cities. So can you tell me more about this relationship with sounds?
I'm fascinated by the sounds of our city. I'm fascinated. Again, mentioning as you have to remember that I did not grow up in my cities, in our Syrian heritage. I grew up outside in a very manicured way. And coming back to our cities and experiencing the soundscape of our cities, where you hear the call to prayer several times, you hear the church's bells ringing, you hear the car horns, you hear the neighbors talking to each other on the balconies, you hear the merchants, 500 البخيار يا وي تعودوا يا هيدو. All that, and then the microbus sounds, and القهوة and Fairuz in the morning, صباح فخري in the afternoon. It was a celebration in my mind of diversity, right? Our cities, especially in Syria, is such a diverse context. And that's why, to answer perhaps your first question, it also hurts for me to talk about Syria, because the Syrian problem has been painted in so many unrealistic scenarios. And what hurts most is that it is a civil religious war between different sects of societies, which is a complete hot bag of hot air, you know. As an architect, as somebody interested in language and history and archaeology, if you walk these cities, and these synagogues and churches and mosques existed for hundreds of years next to each other, right? Centuries, living side by side, creating this soundscape every day of celebration of coexistence. Anybody that has been to our region, they don't have to be even Syrian. They recognize that there is a special sound to our cities. It sounds differently. Al-Qahira sounds different than Damascus. Damascus sounds different than Aleppo, and so on. And so that, for the diaspora, is in itself a nostalgic experience. So when you marry that to a very highly detailed sculpture, and you're standing in front of this, and you're seeing the old car, Bijou, parked there, and the signs, and then you hear the call to prayer come all of a sudden, and you're seeing the laundry lines, and Abu Ahmed, تفضل شرب شاي ليلى أبو أحمد أهلا وسهلا. You know, and the music and all of that. How could you not get nostalgic to that life? And perhaps, inshallah, I'm optimistic to live that again and see that again. But perhaps it might take 1 or 2 generations to go back to that purity of celebration of life, the simplicity that we took for granted, that this will last forever.
Well, I hope it's not going to be 2 generations, to be honest. Well, but going back to this movie, A Broken House, by the New Yorker, there is this part where you were having your last conversation with your mom before she heads back to Syria after her short visit to meet you. You asked her, "La ilna hal," or finds us a solution, because basically every single part of your family was in a different country by then. I don't know if it's still there, if they are still in different countries. So it seems for me that home for you is where your family is gathered, where all you and your siblings can take a collective picture together whenever you want. Is that what really home is for you?
That's what it became to be over many years. Obviously, there was the home in Syria that we built and worked towards having. And subhanAllah, I don't recall once that all 4 siblings and the 2 parents have finally united in that home. So, you know, you try to do your best after the war, and you're like, okay. And of course, I grew up now knowing what I know and the experience that I've been through to believe that home is where peace and tranquility is. Obviously, Damascus and Syria has a special part of my house. But أَلَمْ تَكُنْ أَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةً. يعني God's earth is so huge that you can recreate your own home wherever you are. So I think now we focus on home being as a precious moment, even if it lasts for a day, 2. If we get a week together, alhamdulillah. And I think a lot of families can relate to that feeling now. You know, you don't have to be separated by wars or conflicts. Many families here that are living in perfect lives in the United States don't see each other more than once or twice a year. You know, hence the Thanksgiving dinner, right? Everybody is busy. We're all living busy lives. So home in that sense transcends the meaning of brick and mortar place, but it becomes something that we all long for. And I think part of what the genius of the director of The Broken House is that they made the movie so it really caters to almost every human being. You cannot but have something in common with that human experience. We all long for our loved ones. We are social creatures by nature. We want to be with our loved ones. We are not meant to look at these electronic devices 24/7 and be by ourselves. This is our human nature saying this is not right, even though most of our reality has been that. Most of our reality has been few warm bodies sitting inside one living room, but everybody is on their phone. Deep down, we are missing that home feeling that where people actually looked at each other and had a conversation and had a nice warm meal together. And I'm not gonna say more because I can get myself in trouble if my mom hears me. I'm like, "Wallah, la am tahki, you're the last one to speak. You're always on your phone." So, anyway.
Yeah, well, you are right. We are social creatures at the end of the day. We need each other. So what about our families? So my last question to you is, as your day job is an architect, I'm curious to know if one day you ever go back to Damascus, what would be the very first building you would build there? And what would your house look like?
That's a very hypothetical question that I can answer over 2 weeks with you, Layla. In a perfect world, I would like to build something to focus on the next generations, no matter what. I think it's not about what you build, it's about who you are building to. And I feel that we are on the brink of losing 1 or 2 generations that have grown up not knowing the richness of their cultures. We have 1 or 2 generations now that are growing up not wanting anything to do with Syria or their heritage or their, and they're just like, ما بيصدقوا إمتى يطلعوا لبرا. For them to be called Mike and Joe, and I'm not from Syria, I'm from Brooklyn, man. What are you talking about? So there is a lot of work on our shoulders as creatives and educators to really plant that love of land in their hearts. وعلى هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة, as Darwish said. How do you teach a teenager that grew up in the diaspora and a refugee camp على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة? It's very difficult. It's very challenging. How do you speak to our people when they're like, والله هلا حتحكي لي fun and culture? We don't even have electricity service. We don't have water since 2 days. Get the hell out of here. So, it's going to be a big challenge to start talking about the topics that I'm really, really, really interested and fired up about, and whether the right atmosphere and fabric would be on. That's why I hesitate to answer the question, because I don't think Syria will be prepared to have the climate and what needs to be done to do such goals, whereas you can accomplish tenfolds more from the outside and cater in, if you know what I mean. It's going to be a lot more easier for me to move much faster if I'm working with, educational institutes like, the VCU, like the University of Chicago. Through working with such educational institutions, you're working with folks that are really interested and invested in preserving this culture and preserving, most of people I work with in the West are people that excavated in Palmyra and, Halab and Haman, and they know our culture sometimes 10 times more than we ever do. Like, they're 2,000 years old, man. What are you talking about? That's the oldest calligraphy ever found to humankind. So
sounds so familiar, Mohammed.
Exactly. We can talk forever about this.
No, it's very interesting. And specifically when you were talking about this conversation about حب الوطن and the love of your homeland and على هذه الأرض ما يستحق حق الحياة is like really sounds like every single conversation I have with my parents. So I think everyone can relate to this conversation. Well, Mohammed, I think it was so lovely talking to you and having this conversation, really listening to you and talking about these details about Syria. Like, seriously, these were somewhere in my memories. Somehow I never got them in front of my eyes again. Now listening to you, I can see them over and over again. And like, I think this is the magic of your work, the magic of your, creativity is like, as you said, like everyone can, it's not only Syrians, but everyone can relate to those small details and to the small sounds and calligraphy on the walls and the small pieces of furniture. So really thank you for this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you, Layla. Thanks very much.
And looking forward to see you back in Doha.
Same here.
Dear audience, thank you for tuning in. This audio interview series is an initiative of the gallery at VCUarts Qatar. If you'd like to know more about us and what we do, please follow us on social media at VCUQ_gallery or on our website at www.gallery.qatar.vcu.edu. Special thanks to VCUarts Qatar alumna Riham Mohammad for the music.